Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today I've got a comparison. I really like doing comparisons, so if you enjoy this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You'll see more comparisons coming up, and I've got a few good ones in the works. So let's go ahead and get started with this one. This is a very much requested video. Okay, I have here a Spyderco Endura. Now this is the titanium Damascus Endura, which I do really like and carry quite frequently, especially, for kind of nicer occasions when I want more of a gentleman's folder. I really like carrying this knife, and people really do notice it. Now, I'm going to, we're going to use our imagination and pretend that this is the FRN normal Endura. All of the numbers that I'll share with you, size, weight, blade steel, all of that, that will all be based on a normal Endura. Every once in a while, I'll pull in the Pacific Salt as well for the purposes of this comparison, because the handle is very similar to an Endura. So we're going to let these two kind of stand together and work as the Endura part of this equation. And then the comparison is going to be to the ColdSteel Broken Skull. Very popular new knife. And in some ways, I kind of feel like when this knife was made, now I could be totally wrong about this, okay? But I kind of feel when this knife was in the design phase, they set their sights on the Endura, okay? There are a number of reasons I think that, and I'll kind of go into it as we go through the video. Either way, whatever the motivation was, it did result in a very good, well-built, easy to carry, very large knife. So we'll talk about specifics as we go through, but I do want to start off with a couple of very sort of basic things, okay? I find that these two knives are fairly similar in purpose as large EDC knives for the person who needs something a little bigger or wants something a little bigger. That's my, I just like larger knives. Also, they're large enough and well designed enough that they could serve in any kind of defensive role. If you were a police officer, they could serve in even light. Okay, neither one of these I would consider super hard use. They could both serve in sort of light utility tasks beyond your average EDC. And that extra long blade, I think, adds to that, the utility of both of these blades. Okay, so in addition, the similarities are that these are both slim, both fairly like long, skinny knives, okay? Both of them run similar price range, 60, the Endura today on Blade HQ was like 68 bucks, and the Broken Skull was 83. So there's a bit of a difference, but they're in that, $70 to $100 price range. All right, and there are lots of knives in that price range, okay? Now, in some ways, I do feel like the Broken Skull is just a little bit overpriced. I think it probably could compete, or I mean, probably should be hitting around the same price point as the Endura, although I understand the steel is better, okay? So one other thing that I want to say about these, so we've talked about price, we've talked about size, we've talked about sort of intended use or intended audience. Let's do size and weight here, and then we'll go over to the sort of top-down view. Okay, so the Endura in its standard FRN configuration is 8 3/4 inches overall, 3.5 inch blade, 3.5 inches of cutting edge. Okay, 4 7/8 when it's closed. Okay, so what you're actually carrying in your pocket, about 4 7/8, and weighs in at really about 3.7 ounces, so just under 4 ounces, which is actually phenomenal for a knife of this size. Okay, very, very lightweight, slim EDC knife, and one of the things that's cool about it is you're carrying only a little bit, or in terms of, you're carrying something fairly slim, fairly small in pocket, but it's a very substantial knife. Guess what? The same is still true for the Broken Skull, but it's even maybe more pronounced. This knife is 9 3/8 overall, 4-inch blade, 4-inch cutting edge, 5-inch handle. In fact, it might be a little more than that. 5 and, let me measure this one more time. 5 1/4 inch handle. I couldn't read my own handwriting there. By the way, this weighs even less than the Endura at only 3.1 ounces, which is phenomenal. So you're getting a large knife, still very slim to carry, still very comfortable in pocket, very lightweight. So in terms of size and weight, okay, you're getting more knife for the weight with the Broken Skull, even though it is a little longer. And so with certain pants, probably all of us have those kind of pants where the pockets are a little short. The Broken Skull can be a little bit of a problem for that. But in terms of what you're getting for what you're carrying, the Broken Skull definitely comes out ahead in terms of size and weight. All right, let's carry on now with some of the more detailed stuff, and we're going to switch to the top-down view for that. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so here we are zoomed in on these two blades, actually three blades. From time to time, I'm going to pull in the Pacific Salt to make a particular point, okay? But I'm going to move this one aside for now, and it may come back a little later on. Let's start out by talking about the blade, and we'll start with the Endura. Okay, now this of course is the Damascus blade, but it is full flat ground. It is normally in VG10, and it is a very, you've got a lot of cutting edge, a fairly slim sort of drop point blade here. Very good for utility, very good for food prep tasks. I don't know why that phrase wouldn't come to me there for a second, but a really good all-around utility blade. It's certainly got the size and length to do an awful lot. And VG10 is a very good steel, going to hold an edge reasonably well for you. Switch over to the Broken Skull, and I want to do this comparison here side by side for a second so you can see this. Notice how the two edges are actually quite similar. There's a little more belly on the Broken Skull, which I actually do like, but they both have this very long portion of straight blade and then just a little bit of belly near the front. Now obviously the Endura has considerably less roundness to it here compared to the Broken Skull, but to me the usefulness or the intended purpose of these two blades is fairly similar. The Broken Skull of course is also full flat ground. One thing I will say about the Broken Skull that is a bit of a surprise, or a nice surprise from ColdSteel, is that they tend to get the terminating edge here, at the heel of the blade. They tend to get that right, where in a lot of their models they mess it up. Perfect example is the Talwar here. Notice you've got this very big section of unsharpened blade, which is super annoying, and ColdSteel always does that. I've had a couple of Broken Skulls and I've seen plenty of them, and they don't seem to do that on the Broken Skull, which is nice to see. All right, in terms of blade steel, yes, the CTS XHP is a step up from, as we look at this blade now, is a step up from the VG10. However, the ColdSteel doesn't seem to take it very hard, and I'm sure that there's the design behind that is so that the average user can still sharpen this knife fairly easily, but they end up in terms of edge retention being fairly similar. Now probably in terms of toughness, in terms of corrosion resistance, CTS XHP is going to be a little better all around. It is the better steel, and what I just am saying here now is that the average user is not going to see, I don't think, a significant difference in edge retention, largely because ColdSteel does not take the CTS XHP to a super high Rockwell hardness. Okay, so what am I going to say about these blades? Well, you definitely have a lot more cutting edge here than here. Both of them are sort of lacking the ability to get really close. But notice here, this is more of an ergonomic issue, but both of them give you about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch between your finger and the blade, which can be an issue for some people if you want to do really fine cutting tasks. However, because of the better steel and because you are getting 4 full inches, in fact 4 1/8 inches if you measure this all the way, you're getting 4 1/8 inches of cutting edge here. I've got to give the blade to the Broken Skull. Now I will say this, there are some detractions here aesthetically for me. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the shape of this clip point. I wish they would have done something a little bit different. I'm also not crazy about the blade coating. I would like to see this in a satin finish. I would really, I think this blade would look really, really cool with the same finish that's on this Talwar. Okay, but in terms of functionality, that's not really that's not really an issue, okay? So functionality is basically not affected by those two issues, even though they are complaints, okay? And so overall, I've got to give the blade to the ColdSteel. Now, let's move on to lock and deployment. All right, and here we're gonna face a similar problem, okay? Both of these are back locks, and I'm not gonna even try to do it on camera here, but I'm just gonna tell you, neither one of these flick open super easily, okay? If you own an Endura and if you own a Broken Skull and you've had it for a while, you probably can flick them open. I can do that, but I will admit that they don't flick open nearly as readily as a lot of the other knives that I own. Now, is that the end of the world? How much difference is there between, opening the knife under sort of that control? I can still open it pretty quickly, as you can see, right? So it still opens quickly, but it just doesn't really flick open that readily. And that's the same for both. Now, I will say the Broken Skull is very smooth, and I've noticed this recently on the newer ColdSteels. I have noticed a significant difference in just how smooth the pivots are and how well they become broken in. All right, and so for both of these knives, with use and with constant carrying, I think you'd become proficient enough that you could flick them open pretty easily, but it's never going to be as nice as your Paramilitary 2 or a Domino or any number of other knives that we could name, okay? Now, ColdSteel, of course, almost all their models are going to have that back lock. And so they're always going to, any backlock, okay, both of these are in the same situation in that when they're moving through this range of motion, right, here it goes, the blade is sort of opening here. Well, this backlock, because it's under spring tension, is constantly pushing, right, on the back of that blade. So it's constantly providing a high level of friction, unlike, a liner lock or a frame lock where there's just the detent ball riding along the blade. And so both of these blades, they're not super fast in terms of flicking them open. Now, moving on to the kind of lock, of course, this is a fairly conventional back lock. It does have that Boyd dent, but it's not going to be anywhere near as strong as the ColdSteel Triad lock. The Triad lock is an extremely strong locking mechanism. And if that's one of the things you value, and it is one of the things that I value, okay, then you're going to have to, and I would definitely say the Triad lock means that the ColdSteel comes out ahead in terms of lockup and deployment. Now, moving on to the handle, okay, this is one of the things where I'm going to bring in the Pacific Salt here. Even though it's not exactly the same as an Endura, it's more similar than the titanium. Okay, so I'm going to switch those out now. But the Endura is going to have FRN handles, stainless steel liners in there. They do have the bidirectional texturing, which is not on the Pacific Salt, and does work extremely well, okay? In addition to that, the clip on the Endura is 4-way repositionable, and the thumb ramp on the Endura, which is basically the same as the Pacific Salt, is extremely positive. So when you grab this, you're really, really locked in, okay? Even if you're not holding it super tight, that thumb ramp is going to keep you basically right in place. You're not moving very much on this knife. And even on the titanium one, where it's a totally smooth material here on the handle, because of that thumb ramp and because of the very positive jimping on it, you're still really locked into this knife. Okay, now the ColdSteel does this a different way. Now, by the way, notice it's very, very thin in profile, much thinner than the Endura. Now that does mean that it's not as comfortable. Okay, so in hand, I'm not even going to try to argue that the ColdSteel is as comfortable as the Endura. It really is not. The Endura is a more comfortable knife in hand. All right. Also, because of that thumb ramp here, the Endura definitely comes out ahead in terms of just the confidence that it inspires. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that you're going to slip off of the Broken Skull. The G10 texturing is extremely positive, okay, reminds me of like a Para 2, or if you've got some of the other, the ColdSteel American Lawman, for example, has a similar type of texturing on it. So it's still very grippy, but not quite as positive as the Endura, especially if you consider the bidirectional coating. So the Endura, in terms of ergonomics, in terms of grip, in terms of variability, okay, the titanium one does show it here. So see how on the titanium Endura, it's drilled out here for four-way repositionable clip. For some people, that's going to be a big deal. For me, it's not the end of the world. But again, that is a benefit. And so for ergonomics in hand, and for, you know, if you're going to be doing a lot of cutting where hot spots are going to become an issue, the Endura definitely takes it on ergonomics. And by the way, Spyderco generally does a great job on their ergonomics. So we've got to give that, I believe, to the Endura. Now, overall, okay, and there's going to be a couple subjective things that I want to touch on here. I think that the Endura is a prettier knife, okay? It just looks nicer, okay? Now, it's still, I've got to say, Spyderco, right, the spider hole and the bump that it creates, that's going to put some people off. There's no question about it. But what I'm going to call a somewhat oddly shaped clip point here, sort of this Bowie style, I think that's going to put people off as well. In terms of just the looks of the knife, you know, these are some subjective things that I'm talking about in terms of overall. I've got to say the Endura, to me, is a little more attractive, okay? They are both available in a number of different color options. Now, again, the Endura, one of the things that I think is worth considering is that the Endura comes in a number of different sprint runs. So, you know, I said that, yes, CTS XHP is better than VG10. However, you know, that's somewhat ignoring the fact that the Endura comes in a whole bunch of other steels. And by the way, at this point, we're talking about subjective stuff, so I'm pulling in some other considerations. So, you know, you can do the 180 ZDP 189 or the HAP 40 or the Agomi Super Blue, or a number of other sprint runs that the Endura has come out in. And that's worth considering as well in terms of just pure aesthetics. Right now we're just talking about stuff that we like or don't like from a more subjective standpoint. All right, and in a lot of those areas there are some cool features to the Endura. So the broken skull, I think in terms of just straight up by the numbers comparison, I think the broken skull definitely comes out on top if you just consider, you know, the by the book type of stuff. Now, if you add some subjective things about do I like this company? Do I like the variation in blade steel? Do I like the collectability? Things like that. All of a sudden the Endura takes on, even the history of the Endura and the fact that it's sort of a modern classic. I think all of those things, when we start to consider that, they end up much more equal. All right, so I know I didn't give you a definitive answer on that, but here's my short answer in terms of which one's better, which one should you buy. If it's just about the numbers, okay? Better steel, better materials, stronger construction. Yes, the ColdSteel definitely comes ahead in terms of that stuff. If we start adding a few subjective factors like interest, collectability, overall look, you know, options in terms of sprint runs and stuff like that, then I would say the Endura probably comes out ahead, okay? And of course, the other subjective thing that I just mentioned was the fact that the Endura is a more classic design. So if you're really into knives and you really want to fill out a collection, I think a Spyderco Endura ought to be a part of that. All right, there you go, guys. That's my comparison between these two. And as I said, the simple answer is the broken skull by the book is a better knife. The Endura, when you start considering some subjective factors, it comes out a little bit ahead in that department. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll talk to you soon.